The question is, does God come out of a seventh-day rest at the beginning of the new creation? That's the position I hold. There are Christians who hold a different position. Framework people believe that the seventh day is eternal. Young earth creationists believe it's only 24 hours. We take the position that God remains in a state of creation rest between the creation of Eve and the new creation that follows this creation. So my theological position is that the seventh day is a long period of time in which we're still in, but when evil is conquered, it will come to an end, and then we have the eighth day. In fact, there have been some of us with reasons to believe that have speculated that perhaps God has got this infinite creation calendar laid out for the future, where we've been through the first creation week. Revelation 21 and 22 tell us about the second creation week, but who's to say there's not a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, etc.? God being such a creative creature, who knows what's on his creation calendar? But we have the eighth day to look forward to. By the way, these evaluation sheets you got, you're supposed to fill them out before you leave the room. You're welcome to leave at any time, but not without filling out that sheet. So any more questions or comments? Yes?
Well, kind of a related question, but I've heard some speakers say that the new creation will be a renewal of the present creation rather than explosion, annihilation, and
right.
New creation. I wonder if you have any comments about that.
Okay, do I have any comments about a common Christian interpretation that the new creation is simply a renewal? And that's present what I would call Reconstruction theology. And I guess what disturbs me the most about this young earth, old earth debate is I've noticed the young earth creationist camp has been invaded by the Reconstruction theologians, particularly at the Institute for Creation Research and Answers in Genesis. And so those groups are adopting a change in their creation theology where they now believe that the new creation is simply a restoration of the conditions that Adam and Eve enjoyed in the Garden of Eden. Probably the prime movers in that group would be Doug Phillips and Henry Morris II. They've actually put quite a bit into print. But almost all the leaders of the young earth creationist camp were involved in an audio discussion on this issue, which incidentally was a response to our 6 one-hour tapes. They came up with their own. And what I find remarkable is where our camp differs from their camp is on the eschatology, the theology of the end, not the theology of the beginning. The difference, I think, is much more serious. And I would argue that what you believe about the date for the creation of the earth and the universe has no bearing on gospel theology. It has no bearing on biblical inerrancy. It's not an important theological issue or doctrine. However, I would not agree that the position you take on the theology of the end is inconsequential. I see this as a much more serious issue, and I think it deserves some serious attention from the Christian community. In this sense that, I came to Christ through looking at all the different religions of the world and determining that Christianity was the only one that had objective proof in favor of it. But one of the things I observed is that every religion, predominant religion today, has the same Garden of Eden story that we have in the Bible. That's quite remarkable. They all talk about how the human species started off in paradise, how we lost paradise, and the message of the other religions is that the God or the gods are in the business of restoring us to paradise. But what attracted me about the Bible is it taught a different message, that God's not in the business of restoring us to paradise, He's in the business of delivering us from paradise. And this really gives some insight as to why God would expose us to evil. Our exposure to evil and suffering is a means by which God can prepare and train us to receive something far superior to what Adam and Eve enjoyed in the Garden of Eden. Now, in that context, evil has a purpose. Death has a purpose. And I think this explains why the young earth and the old earth camps differ on their theology of death. It's because they differ so much on their theology of the time of the end. But I'm disturbed about the Christian community drifting into the theology that I see in the non-Christian religions of the world and what I see in the Christian cults like the Jehovah's Witnesses.
On that, is that not to some degree making a parody of what is a common view that whereas in the end times there won't be an identical universe to the one that Adam and Eve were brought into, that there will be some degree of continuity, at least in terms of categories of things like beauty, of dimension, of colour and taste, and so on. Not to say that's limited to that, but I was saying it's going to be an existence of an entirely different order. In which case, why would the suggestion be that we have resurrection bodies which have some kind of continuity with the bodies that we have?
Good question. We have the scriptures that talk about this continuity between this creation and the next creation. Our bodies have a certain continuity. As you mentioned, there's this continuity of beauty and elegance and joy that'll be present in the new creation. And I have no problem with any of that. What I have a problem with is this doctrine that the stars we're seeing today are going to burn for all of eternity. And that's going to be part of the new creation. I can show you a verse in Revelation 21 that explicitly says there will be no stars in the new creation. There will be no sun in the new creation. There will be no electromagnetism in the new creation. The light we experience, which is bright and dark, where there's shadows and darkness, will be replaced with a new creation, a new kind of light where there's no shadows and no darkness at all. This isn't electromagnetism. Likewise, we don't have gravity. It talks about this New Jerusalem structure, 1,200, 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles. It's got corners. That violates the law of gravity. There's no gravity in the new creation. On the other hand, I would agree with you. There is geography, there is temporality, there is beauty, there is light. All that's part of the new creation. But it's in a manner that's far beyond the beauty and the light that we experience now. And the relationships we have with one another are far beyond what we can imagine. I mean, the most intimate thing we can imagine in this creation is marriage. But in the new creation, it tells us there is no marriage. There are no families. There is no sex. God replaces all that with something far better, which is why my publisher argued that my book Beyond the Cosmos should have had the title Better Than Sex. We would have sold a lot more copies.
The continuity and discontinuity that you're talking about, would it not be better to relate that to the death and resurrection of Christ? That Christ is the key. You see both continuity and discontinuity between the resurrected Christ and Christ is also continuous with the history of Israel and yet also this.
Okay, the question. Yeah, I think I got it.
The Holy Spirit born of the Virgin Mary, that's continuity and discontinuity. And raised from the dead, but not always recognized by bodily existence.
Okay, the point he's making is, shouldn't we expect there to be the great discontinuity at the incarnation rather than at the beginning of the second creation? Well, I could take you back to the sermon that Moses gave, his last sermon, where he told the Jews, okay, you have the first covenant, but if you put your faith and hope in the first covenant, you'll miss the point of why you've been brought into the wilderness by God, and now we're going to be taken to the promised land. His last sermon was to point the Jews forward to the second covenant that will come in the future. Well, likewise, I would argue that God today is pointing us to the third covenant. We have the incarnation, we have the death and resurrection of Christ, but Christ's work is not yet done. He's going to prepare a place for us. And this is where the laws of physics change. Now, if you want a theological explicit statement on that, Jeremiah 33:25. The laws that govern the heavens and the earth are fixed. They're fixed from the point of the creation of the universe until the end of this universe. So the end of the universe is where we have the great changes in the laws of physics. And of course, all you got to do is look at the